Hello, welcome to my Chapter 1 event with Dymocks. My name's Paige Toon and I'm the author of The Minute I Saw You. With all of my post-it notes ready, I might be doing a little reading for you at some point. So this is a bit strange, isn't it? I don't normally sit here and chat to my computer. Usually I'm already interacting with readers, and the idea of actually sitting here and talking at you all. Hi Lorraine, glad at least one person's like tuned in. This is nice to know. Yeah, I don't usually sort of sit here chatting away at my computer. I'm normally sort of doing nice live events and being able to take questions and chat to other authors on screen. So I really hope I can sit here and ramble and talk to you for the next kind of 15-20 minutes, and then we will be opening this up to questions and hopefully getting a lovely little bit of reader interaction going on. I'm just going to show you, the reason why most people have probably tuned in today, and that is, oh, she's not happy about being woken up. This is Tessa, my little puppy, who is sleeping so happily on my lap and just growled because I've woken her up. I'm sorry, darling. I'm sorry. I'm not going to play with you right now. We're just going to show the readers my cute little pup and then put her back to sleep. And then at some point, some family members might come and take care of her. Here to talk about The Minute I Saw You and just writing generally, and also just to sort of say cheers. I know it's only like 11 o'clock in the morning, but I made my signature lockdown cocktail. It's 11 o'clock in the morning here in the UK, which is where I am right now. I'm in Cambridge. But I know that it's 8 o'clock where a lot of my Australian viewers are. So I'm figuring, at the very least, I've got to show you my signature lockdown. Loads of people have been baking, haven't they, in lockdown and making all of these amazing like cakes and stuff like that. I've done a little bit of that. I'm finding that quite stressful. In fact, the fruit bowl has just constantly got overripe bananas in it. And like the idea of making another banana chocolate muffin is just really doing my head in. So we have a garden and I grow rhubarb, and I inherited the rhubarb from the last person who grew the rhubarb, who lived in our house. But I thought, it'd be nice to do something with this rhubarb other than a crumble. So I made this amazing rhubarb syrup, and then mixed it with a little bit of vanilla vodka and a lot of lemonade at this time of the morning, and put some candy floss on top, or fairy floss as it is called in Australia, which is obviously where I grew up. And it was always my favorite thing. I've got a very sweet tooth. So we made the fairy floss a week or so ago with the kids. We bought a fairy floss machine for my daughter's birthday, my son's birthday actually, about a year ago. And so I'm making use of this stuff in lockdown. So anyway, cheers. It's probably the last time I'll take a break to have a drink. I'll be drinking that afterwards when it all goes horribly wrong. So I'm going to just be talking to you a little bit about, I thought you might like to know a bit about my upbringing, and just my writing journey generally. I had quite an unusual childhood. My dad used to be a racing driver, and so we used to spend half the year in Australia, which is where I went to school, and the other half of the year either in America or in England. And we've got the lovely Tim from Dymocks behind the scenes, like working away and putting pictures up. Thank you, Tim. I really appreciate your help. So that was the house where I grew up, in Mount Barker in the Adelaide Hills. And but we used to travel. I'd spend sort of half the year in Australia where I went to school, and the other half in either America or England, depending on where my dad was racing at the time. So now we've got some shots of, me in front of a cactus in America. Here it comes. I had lots of fun last night. Trying to find old pictures. So bear with me, that I probably could have done better than that. But so we used to travel around quite a lot. And in fact, one of these things with lockdown is the whole homeschooling, and what a total nightmare it is. And I know a lot of people are really panicking about their kids being out of school for 6 months, which is what at least the case over here in the UK. And I used to be out of school for 6 months a year, every year, until I was about 13 or 14, when I finally went to secondary school and we moved to England permanently. So it's all going to be okay. We used to do tutoring, my brother and I. That's my brother in the background there with my dad. at one of the racing events. But, you know, we didn't used to, hi Shannon, hello. We used to, you know, just do tutoring for like half of the year, just a couple of hours a day. And, you know, we got okay. You know, I probably could have, you know, done better, but anyway, it's all good. So yeah, don't stress about it. We'll all catch up in the end. So yeah, I had a strange childhood, kind of traveling around quite a lot, which definitely inspired my writing at a later date. But in terms of my book writing journey, I you know, I've always wanted to be an author. You know, I think it was the first job that I ever wanted to do. As soon as I kind of really knew, you know, that authors existed, I was like, you know, that's what I would really like to do. Hi, Hannah. Thank you very much. Oh, from Brisbane. That's lovely. I don't know if I saw you at the Brisbane event last Easter when I came over to Australia and did a bit of a tour, but that Brisbane event, I'll just say now, was the first time I was expected to stand up and actually just talk, because normally it's almost always interactive and I'm asking for questions straight away. Like, I find it really hard just to prattle on. So forgive me. And I think I managed to stand up there at the front for maybe 10 minutes, like a bunny in the headlights, before I finally said, actually, can you just ask me some questions now? So yeah, you're going to have to forgive me. I'm definitely keeping a close eye on the time here to make sure I can prattle on for long enough. So where was I? My writing journey. I've always wanted to be an author. You know, it's the first thing I wanted to do. And, you know, I used to write stories all the time when I was growing up. And, you know, when I got a little bit older and I started reading magazines, and, you know, Aussies here will remember Dolly magazine. You know, that was my absolute favorite magazine ever. And when we moved over to England permanently, I still had it sent for a couple of years, you know, like sent every month, you know, and I'd just devour it. And I thought, well, you know, that would be quite nice. I'll go and work for a magazine first, and then I'll become an author, and then I'll be able to, like, you know, have kids and work from home, and, you know, had all these sort of grand plans. And anyway, you know, I ended up going back and working for a magazine after university, and I worked for Heat magazine as a reviews editor. And I would see all of these amazing books kind of like coming in, and rather than it kind of making me think, oh yeah, I'm going to be able to do that one day, I started sort of feeling like my whole dream was slipping away. I could not imagine the idea of, I had an idea for a book, but the idea of like filling out 100,000 words and it being good enough, you know, I thought there's no way it's going to ever be, you know, good enough to be published. And so it was really sort of, I don't know, I honestly felt like when I was working at Heat that if I don't ever write a book, it will be my biggest regret. And I had this idea, you know, my parents had moved back to Australia and I was still in the UK, and I was with my boyfriend to be, you know, eventually to become my husband, and, you know, had a great job. And I felt very, very torn between Australia and England. You know, had like my best friends in the whole world in Australia, and my parents and my brother, you know, and the rest of my entire extended family, like they all live in Australia. I'm the only one who lives on the other side of the world still. And, you know, and I just felt incredibly torn. And so I had this idea for this girl, you know, being torn between two countries. And also, you know, it was supposed to start off with this idea of her getting onto a flight to Australia and getting a text message from her boyfriend's phone saying, I've slept with your boyfriend 4 times in the last month, and then having an air hostess come over and say, turn off your phone right now, so she can't kind of ring him back or anything. And so that was kind of like the seed of an idea for my first book. And I used to meet lots of publicists when I worked at Heat, you know, like I'd sort of often be taken out for lunch, and, you know, people wanting to go into the book chat or have a review. And one of them had become a friend, Nigel Stoneman. He was a publicist at Simon & Schuster. And he said to me, you should write a book, love. You know, you get a book deal easy. You know, you work for Heat magazine, which at the time was selling like 600,000 copies a week. Like, it was like the biggest magazine in the UK, you know, one of the biggest in the world, and was just, you know, like a massive big deal. And I worked as, you know, on the reviews desk, and I was like, well, I do have an idea. And my heart was hammering, and I'd like written a page of my first book, you know, only a page, because I felt so nervous at the idea of, you know, writing this book and pouring my heart and soul into it, and it never getting published, and no one ever, you know, ever sort of reading this book. I just, and it just being too rubbish. I thought I'll start reading it myself and I'll think it's so rubbish I won't be able to carry on. I'll be crippled by, by this awful kind of feeling of failure. And, I was just too scared to write it. Like, I have so much respect for people who've written entire books and then try to get a book deal traditionally. But for me, it didn't work out like that, because Nigel said, you should write a book. And I thought, well, I've got this idea. And so I told him the idea, for this girl getting on a plane and, getting this text message. And he said, I love it. I'm going to go back and tell the big boss, my publisher, Suzanne Babineau, from Simon & Schuster. And I was just like, I felt so sick with excitement, the idea that someone was actually going to go and talk about my idea. Anyway, 5 minutes after I get back to the office, I have an email from Suzanne saying, I love the idea. Nigel's just told me, I'd like to meet you. How about we meet a week today for breakfast? And I was just, honestly, like, I was nearly spontaneously combusting at my desk. I was like so ridiculously excited. And so, of course, I jumped at the chance. And that weekend, I wrote the first 3 chapters. I wrote 5,000 word synopsis. My brother, my brother's really creative, and I sort of told him what the idea was, and he sent me through all of these texts, ideas for name title suggestions, one of which was Lucy in the Sky. And I'd already called my heroine something else. She was initially called Meg, but I just did a quick find and replace on Meg, changed it to Lucy. And when I went along for this meeting with the publisher, she asked me if I'd written anything. I said yes, had this title. And so I sent it all to her straight after our lovely breakfast meeting. And 2 days later, I was offered a 2-book deal. And now that's really, really unusual. Like I hadn't written anything other than 3,000 words and 3 chapters and a 5,000 word synopsis. But because I worked at Heat magazine, I was already a published writer. I guess, definitely working for, a big magazine at the time gave me a massive sort of head start, but so anyway, then Nigel says to me, he said, I'd tell her you can write it by Christmas and have it out next April. And I don't know what got into me, but I suggested this. I had a full-time job, and this was September. And I'd never written a book before in my life. I'd been crippled by any attempt prior to that. But, I said, how about I write it by Christmas and we'll have it out next April? And she said, well, we wouldn't normally do that. We'd normally allow sort of, a good sort of year and a half, before receiving the book, And anyway, she said yes. So I had 3.5 months to write my first ever book, and with a full-time job. And I ended up writing it in 2.5 because I was just so massively into it. It was like one of the happiest times in my life, I fell in love with the characters. I felt like I was inside Lucy's head, experiencing all the same things that she was experiencing. And during this period, I was very, very lucky. In early October, it was my mum's birthday. It was a big birthday. I think it was her 60th. And so it was her 60th. And so we were all planning on flying out to Australia to go on this lovely cruise. And so while I was there, Mum came with me. We flew over to Sydney. Initially, I was going to set Lucy in the Sky in Adelaide, which is where I grew up in South Australia, in the Adelaide Hills. And I remember my brother saying at the time, he was like, no, it needs to be Sydney. That's something that everyone can picture, with the Opera House, it's easier to, it's more likely to have an impact on people if they are familiar already with the city. But I wasn't that familiar with Sydney. So my mum and I flew over to Sydney and Manly, and we drove around. I know Tim's going to chuck a picture of me, like doing a little bit of Sydney research, which was, just standing in front of the Sydney Opera House. There we go. and we just drove all around Manly and Sydney, and I just sat there with a notebook, writing, scribbling what I was seeing, and imagining all the places that Lucy and all of her friends would be like going out and where they might live, and going down to the beach at Manly, and so watching the surfers for a while, because Nathan, the Aussie guy, he's a surfer. And it was just the most amazing thing, like to be there in that place, really imagining what it's like for my heroine and what she's getting up to. It was really, really magical. I sort of felt like, it felt like a part of Sydney belonged to me, as though a part of me still lives in Manly, and still has that lifestyle that I was writing about. And I remember when the book came out, I had so many readers writing to me and say, I felt like I was there. And so I've always wanted to go on and research places, since, but I'll get to that in a minute. I was just going to say, finishing this book, just the nervousness, like the sick feeling, like I loved writing it, but as soon as it was finished, the idea that people were actually going to read it, because I had the book deal at that point, like there was no stopping this, and one of my favorite authors ever, Marian Keyes, I'd reviewed her books in Heat, and I'd met her at a couple of launches for her books. And so I emailed her and I said, is there any chance you would read this and potentially give me a quote? And she doesn't normally, she didn't normally give quotes at the time. She was asked too much, but she said, I'll make an exception for you, because I'd sort of reviewed her books nicely in Heat and stuff. And oh God, the feeling of her reading it, and just, I remember like sobbing at Christmas and just being so terrified that it was rubbish, While I had absolutely loved the writing of it, I had no idea if it was any good. But it wasn't until the book was published and I started reading those first sort of Amazon reviews, that and hearing from readers who didn't know me from Adam, they weren't my family or friends. Sort of, you never really believe your family and friends, and I'm sure there are lots of my friends who definitely, my style of writing is not their cup of tea at all, so they're not the ones that I kind of want to tell me what they think of my book. Because I'll be like, yeah, I like. Yeah, it was good, and I'll be like, okay, go back and read whatever it is. But yeah, so seeing those first Amazon reviews was that for me was, having readers like who I didn't know saying, I fell in love with Nathan, I just, it meant the absolute world to me. And when I came to write Johnny Be Good and my next book, that was quite stressful. Like, basically, as soon as I delivered Lucy in the Sky, for the 3 months prior to that, my husband and I had been thinking, right, now's a good time to have a baby. And then I got a book deal. And I was like, right, I can't get pregnant now. I need to be able to write this book. And then I delivered the book. And then it was like, actually, do you know what? It'd be really nice to just have a year being able to do the book publicity and have a launch party and drink, at the launch party without having a baby. So, let's postpone it another year. But yeah, no, that didn't happen. So I fell pregnant almost as soon as I delivered the book by accident. Happiest before my baby came in September. Oh, it was impossible. I've since discovered that I have a window for writing time, which is September, October, and November. And that was when I wrote Lucy in the Sky. And eventually, I'd written 50,000 words of Johnny Be Good, so half the book. And then my baby came, and about 6 weeks after he was born, and in mid-September, I started writing again. And I ended up shredding almost all of those 50,000 words and writing the whole book in, again, about 2.5 months. Just because, I don't know, there's something about that time of year when I feel really connected, like to the characters. I think it's, over in England, looking behind me right now, it's a bit of a rainy day today, but it has been full on sunny for about 2 months, like really, really hot. It's like the hottest May on record ever, I think, like the sunniest May. And anyway, when it's hot, I find it really, really hard to write. I find it in my brain sort of turns to cotton wool, and I really struggle to concentrate. So yeah, for Johnny Be Good, I definitely really struggled with that. And ever since then, I've, tried to write in this sort of window of September, October, November, when I'm really, really focused and just, that's all I'm thinking about is the book, So just going to say, anyway, and also with Johnny Be Good as well, again, I was terrified about what the readers would think. But those reviews, for Lucy, I kind of just said, had a word with myself and just said, if your readers love this book as much as, thank you, Amy, if your readers love this book as much as you loved writing it, if they sort of connect with your characters in the way that you do, then you'll be fine. And that is proved, thank God, right, time and time again, because I absolutely love writing. Like, you can see that my books are not normally up there on the windowsill behind me. At the moment, it's usually a cat bowl and the cat food because the poor cat is having to deal with a puppy in the house. So, but I've whacked them all up there just for the hell of it. And I loved writing every single one of those. I'll get to the minute I saw you in a minute, but that was the one I loved probably writing the most. But yeah, I'll talk about that in a sec. I've got a bit more rambling to do first. So I'm just going to talk about some research, and I know Tim again. Thank you very much, Tim. Has got some pictures of like different lovely, research trips I've been able to do. Like that was when I went to Hollywood. I was 3 months pregnant at the time, researching Johnny Be Good, and I just found after going to Sydney with my mum that the most important thing for me is to go to the places and feel fully immersed in these places that I'm writing about, and really try to imagine that's LA again. Like in Johnny Be Good, Meg actually goes to this place and sits there in these weird sort of dome things that's got waterbed underneath it on a rooftop bar in the Standard downtown is the name of the hotel. And so yeah, I got to sit there and had my one Bellini. I was pregnant, had to have at least one, right? Well, just one, sorry, not at least. And, but I just sort of find that going to the places is just so, so important. I can really connect with the characters when I'm in these sort of different lovely locations. And this one here is 5 years from now. And The Last Piece of My Heart, this is set in Cornwall in England. Which is just one of my favorite places in the UK. I hadn't been there until I went there on a holiday, and then as we were driving out of the campsite where we had a camper van, I just sort of thought, this is where Bridget should come in The Last Piece of My Heart. She should literally work from a camper van. So, sometimes it works that we go to the places that I want to write about, and pretty much all of my family holidays, are sort of dictated around that. Like we went to Norway for research, but a lot of the time with, things like Thailand. I went to Thailand for The Last Piece of My Heart, but I'd just been there on a family holiday and thought, well, I have to write this into a book. So, and if you could go anywhere, where I went to Rome, but we purposefully went to suburban Rome rather than stay in a nice hotel downtown. Because I wanted to live in, my character was going to be living on the outskirts. She was going to be living in a suburban place. So it's not always like, the nicest sort of locations, but it's an absolute, it's a joy. I feel very, very lucky. There's good old Rome, the Pantheon, which is one of my favorite buildings in the world. It's pretty amazing from the inside. Yeah, there's Thailand. So that was when I went with my family, and that's probably one of my favorite places in the world. I remember when people were saying, if you could go anywhere, where would you go? And I think my number one place would be going back to Thailand. It was just so, so beautiful. I'd definitely love to go back there again. So I've also got some Cambridge pictures, because the reason, before we get on to Cambridge, we'll just show a couple more of these ones. This is the south of France where I went for Baby Be Mine. And again, that was a family holiday, and I thought, I've got to write this into a book. I'd like to, actually incorporate this. So I wrote One Perfect Summer, which is my 6th book. And it starts off, it's in Dorset, which is really beautiful, sort of all these cliffs and, just gorgeous sort of scenery. And then halfway through the story, my character, Alice, moves to Cambridge. And we moved to Cambridge at the point in the story that I was writing it. And so suddenly I was researching, the city that had become my new home. And so for the first time ever, I actually got to stay, which was just the most magical thing ever to, I had to go behind the scenes at some of the colleges, have a quite funny story about this, this sort of, old guy who, obviously didn't want like a women's fiction. He didn't really want to speak to a women's fiction author. He was just like, I remember him saying to me that his secretary had emailed my interview, my sort of request to him, and he said, and she'd just written no ? And anyway, so he said, I agreed to meet you because he basically had looked up my biography and seen that my dad was a racing driver, and he was interested to hear a little bit more about that. So, but he was hilarious. He said, I don't know if you're one of these authors who thanks people in their acknowledgements. He said, but can you not? He said, because if my colleagues find out, I'll never hear the end of it. So he was a bit of a wally, but anyway, I really massively appreciate his time, because he showed me like a side of the colleges that I'd never seen before, and really, got to imagine what it would be like to do that. And so anyway, writing about Cambridge for One Perfect Summer was really, really magical. And several years later, I really felt like writing about it again, because, you know, now I live in Cambridge, or on the outskirts. And, you know, to be able to actually write about some of the things that happened, you know, in my life, and the sort of things that I do, like, you know, going and hanging out in Grantchester and going to the lovely pubs, and, you know, canoeing down the River Cam, and, you know, just sort of hanging out at tea gardens and stuff like that. I thought that would be really, really lovely to be able to write about that. So I'm going to talk now, because I can't believe I've managed to prattle on for this long. I'm going to talk now about The Minute I Saw You, which is my new one. And this is a story of Hannah and Sunny, who meet because she works as a dispensing optician, and he comes in and wants to, you know, has to have his eyes tested, and they have to get quite up close and personal for this eye test. And so I'll just do a super quick reading, because this is sort of how it starts. Right. I hope I'm not prattling on for too long. Okay. His eyes are so blue, azure blue, I'd call them, thus startling against his dark lashes. Have a seat and pop your chin on the rest, I say when he's ready. After taking pictures of the back of each eye, we switch to a second multifunctional machine so I can do a quick reading of his prescription. Have you worked here long? He asks. Only a few weeks. What happened to Mr. Grumpy? He's leaning back in his chair, smirking and gently swivelling from left to right. If you're talking about Bernard, and I wouldn't like to presume, then he's moved up to Scotland to be closer to his ailing parents. He grins. Can't say I'll miss his halitosis. You haven't got up close and personal with me yet. No. Those words did not just leave my lips. Except from the look on his face, it appears that they did. His eyes have widened, not to mention his grin. I did not mean that the way it sounded. He laughs with delight, and despite my embarrassment, the sound makes me feel jittery. One last test, I say through gritted teeth. So she goes on to finish the test, and then he goes and chooses his glasses, and then he has to come back to her again for the fitting. So, can I check the fit? Sure. He leans closer to me across the narrow desk space. He smells amazing. There's the slightest trace of abrasion under my thumbs as they rest on his cheeks and give the frames a wiggle. The corner of his mouth tilts up, but he hastily presses his lips together, trying to suppress a smile. I bite my lip, trying to straighten my own face. His humour is having a contagious effect. Sorry, he apologises. It's okay, I murmur, running my fingers along the length of the arms of the glasses to make sure they're long enough to sit properly on his ears. Once again, his lips twitch. Sorry, he mutters adorably as we full-on grin at each other. Lots of people get the giggles, I reassure him as I complete my checks. I didn't get the giggles with Bernard, he comments dryly, and a thrill darts through me. Right, now I need to take some measurements. I pick up a marker pen. Look at me again? He stares straight into my eyes as I mark the spot where the centre of his pupil aligns with the lenses. I'm far more aware than usual of this particular client's close proximity, but I'm focused on the task. It's important that the strongest part of his prescription marries up with his eyeline. You have very unusual eyes, he says in a low voice as I finish with his second eye. They kind of have all this chemistry at this initial eye test, but when he comes back in for the second reading, for the second sort of to have his glasses fitted, he is a complete shadow of his former self. He can't look her in the eye, and he's like, his hands are shaking, and basically something really bad has happened to him, and something really bad has happened, and it takes a while before you unfold, before you sort of like come to the crux of it. But they're both sworn off relationships, these two. Neither of them do long-term relationships for very different reasons. But Sunny has taken a vow of abstinence. So where Hannah would have been quite happy to sort of like potentially have a one-night stand and be done with it, get him out of her system, he's like, no, he's going through therapy. He's like, I'm not going to do that for at least 6 months to a year because I want to try and form lasting relationships. So the two of them become friends. And it was such a joy to be able to write about, this sort of light, sort of sexy, flirty banter between them with, and the chemistry sort of build on that because, ultimately they can't do anything. So it can't go anywhere, at least for 6 months. And over the course of that time that they get to know each other, they, if you don't mind, Tim, also sort of maybe just sort of throwing up some research pictures of Grantchester and also Amsterdam and Australia, because I went to all of these places. This is Grantchester Meadows, which is, you can see the river just sort of glinting down at the bottom there. But ultimately, they need to get to the bottom of what their problems are. And Sonny himself lives in Amsterdam. This is me at the tea garden in Grantchester, sampling a cup of tea whilst doing my research. And also, if you can show the Blue Ball Inn, which is one of the pubs, where a lot of the action is set. They have these two friends, Archie and Matilda, who they become a really strong foursome. And going off to the Blue Ball of Grantchester, I had to go there a couple of times for my research, and yeah, it's just a lovely place to to be able to set a book. But it's definitely the shades of light and dark in this one. I think the extremity between it is bigger than all of my previous books. So I'm thinking, if you don't mind, Tim, you're welcome to just chuck up the odd other picture. But I'm going to move on to questions now, because I know I've been chatting for a long time, and I promised I did a Q&A with my readers in the UK. We've got a paperback. It's not coming out because of coronavirus. It's not coming out until the 6th of August. And so a lot of my lovely readers of the ebook have sent in questions, and I've stolen 3 that I'm using for the Q&A to open up the question session here. So 3 of them are going to see that their questions made the paperback. And here we go, Shannon Palmer. You're the first one that is, and I know she's already here because I've seen her say hello. You've said on social media that Hannah and Sonny are 2 of your favourite characters. What's different about them than all the rest? The thing with these 2 for me, they go through so much together in this book. They're joyful, in the sense of their flirty banter, and they're just such lovely characters to write about. Like, I loved writing about them. I really fancy Sonny, and he's probably one of my favorite characters that I've ever written about. But the darkness that they have to go through and the secrets that they eventually unveil, and the sort of, one of them in particular, like Hannah's backstory, is incredibly unusual. And I think the journey that they go on over the course of the book, because it's so light, but it's also so dark, I just felt really, really connected to them by the end. And I just absolutely wanted the best for them. So that's kind of why they're my favorites, I think, because the journey they go on is so intense and so extreme. And I just love them. They were so joyful to write, even though this was a hard book at times. They kept it joyful for me, because I was always coming back to the chemistry between them, and as they navigate their way through. So yeah, that's what I would say. And so we'll have our next question, please, from readers who've made the paperback. Pernil, one of my favorite readers. Pernil's been with me since the very beginning, and always sort of like sends amazing little images and does some infographics. So she says, how do you come up with your characters? Do they appear complete in your head, or do their personalities come as you write? A little bit of both, but usually I think of the main story first. Usually that's the thing that comes to mind first, and then it's about the characters. And with Hannah and Sonny were quite strong almost immediately, because once I came up with the idea for Hannah's backstory, which I came up with when I was jet lagged in Australia last Easter at 3 a.m. I'd watched a film on the plane, which had this tiny reference to something that happens to some children. And I thought, imagine being that character when she's an adult, and then suddenly, it all sort of carried on. Like, it's, the whole idea sort of carried on inside my head, and and now I have this idea for Hannah. But I tend to come up with the idea for my book a year before I start writing it. It was less time for The Minute I Saw You, which is amazing that they were so strong initially, because normally I have a good year of really thinking about it. I'm thinking about their story inside my head. I'm building up conversations between them. I have a really, really strong idea of what my next 3 characters will be like in my next book, because I've been thinking about them for over a year actually. So it's sort of a little bit of both, but definitely as I'm writing, their personalities will develop more. Like Sonny's backstory, I didn't fully know until I was actually writing, and that kind of unveiled itself to me as I was going along, because I think I maybe did know deep down, something bad had happened to him, but I think it was too painful to accept to start with. So it was a while before he, he kind of really properly sort of unveiled his entire character and his history. But also, there's Pernil. But also, when you're doing research, the more I research a book, like, for example, you saw a picture of me earlier standing on top of a mountain with snow in the background. And that was me going and researching the one we fell in love with. And I had to climb to the top of a mountain for that. Well, I didn't climb, Christ, no. I got on a cable car and went to the top. But I was terrified of, I actually didn't realize I was so scared of heights until I was at the top of, this mountain. And a couple of years later, after I'd written the book, we went back to Chamonix and went up on the same cable car. And I felt completely different because I'd been inside one of my characters' heads for so long, the course of writing a book, that I felt so much more connected to her and what she'd done. And so it's funny, I do sort of feel like, a little part of the character sort of stays with me as I go on. So sorry, we'll move on to the next question. I can't believe I've prattled for this long. So Beth asks, so many of your books are set in far-flung places. Why did you set this one so close to home? Did you enjoy it more or less than books where you'd be taking research trips? And I absolutely loved setting this in Cambridge. I think because I was already so in tune with it, I think that's probably also why I found this book so easy to write, because I was writing about stuff that I was so familiar with. I didn't have to imagine living there because I already lived there. And so it just took me that extra step closer to being able to write the book that I really wanted to write. So even though my next book is not set in Cambridge, it's set, a big chunk of it will be set in the Yorkshire Dales. And I tend to always have a little nod to Australia. If you want to show the last few pictures, Tim, of just, when we went to Australia last Easter on the houseboat, I went out there with my family. It was a family holiday. And I thought it'd be really lovely to be able to incorporate that into The Minute I Saw You. So Hannah's parents, oh, sorry, Tim. Okay. Hannah's parents, they go to Australia. They live in Australia on a houseboat on the Murray River. And so, it was lovely to be able to incorporate that. I try to give a nod to Australia in my books because, that's where I grew up. That's where my entire family still live. And I still feel, Australian in my heart, even though I know I sound like a Pommy now. Right, I think we should probably open this up to questions. I'm really sorry I've been prattling for so long, and I really hope, you've got some questions there for me. So Luke asks, what inspires the backstories and how your characters interact with each other? Well, the backstories, so there are two ideas for the story, and one is the optician idea. That happened to a friend of mine, and just got giggles with a hot optician. But Hannah's backstory, as I've mentioned, was inspired by this film that I'd seen on a plane on my way to Australia, and the idea of this baby, being a grown-up and adult and having to deal with all of the issues that were sort of mentioned in the film. And I answered that question properly in the UK paperback, which I will put in the hidden page, which is my free newsletter. If you want to sign up at pagetoon.com, you can. It's free. At some point, I'll probably publish the Q&A there too, so my Aussie readers and German readers and readers from around the world can kind of get those answers too. But as for Sonny, his backstory, like I say, that kind of unveiled itself to me as I was going along. It's quite dark, and probably one of the darkest things I think I've ever written in a novel. And I think it just came because of his character. Why does he have a problem with long-term relationships? And just sort of getting to the bottom of that, and understanding that, eventually, gave me this idea for Sonny. So okay, and so any more questions? Melanie asks, since you left us longing for more Hannah and Sonny, any chance of a sneaky little lockdown short story? Yes, I've been thinking actually about If You Could Go Anywhere, and writing about Angie and Alessandro. That's my last book. Angie has always wanted to travel in that book, but she's been still, you can see I've still got the dog here. It's fast asleep on my lap. She's just starting to stir. But she'd always wanted to travel, and Alessandro has always traveled. It's what he's always done. So now they're together, living in Italy on the outskirts of Rome. I was imagining, how they would be able to cope with lockdown. So I've been really tempted to write that, and the trick is time, because I'm still publicising, obviously, The Minute I Saw You, even though I do most of my writing between September, October, November. There's so much else to do the rest of the year. And so, I just hope I can find the time, because obviously now you're throwing in homeschooling and getting the kids organised every day as well. So we'll see how I get on. But I would love to write Angie and Alessandro a short story about how they're getting on in lockdown. Right, is there any other questions? Thank you so much. It's lovely seeing so many people, in my comment section. I really appreciate you all tuning in. Kate says, if you could pick only one of your books to be made into a movie, which one would you pick? Ooh, that's a difficult one. I would love any of them to be made into a film. And do any of my readers work at Netflix? And if not, can some of you go and get a job for Netflix and, tell them how amazing my books are and, tell them that they really make great movies or Netflix series. So yeah, on that note, after I've tried to emotionally blackmail you into doing that, I think probably Johnny Be Good. I'd love to see the whole Johnny series and the Jessie series made into a Netflix series. That would just be so much fun. He's a rock star. My character Meg, works as a PA, and she's just a very ordinary girl in this absolutely extraordinary setting. Having to follow this one of the most famous sort of rock stars around the world. And I just think that'd be really interesting to kind of see that from her perspective, and just really sexy. And frankly, I'd just like to see Johnny come to life. I always find it really hard when readers ask me who they would cast as if my books were to be made as movies. And I find it impossible because they don't look like anyone inside my head. They look very different. They're sort of more of a feeling, if anything. But I'm always really keen to hear what other people think. And I think it'd be really fun to see who would be cast in Johnny's role in particular. Any more questions? Tegan asks, how do you carry out the writing process? Research or outline a story first? Always outline a story first. It's the idea that will come to me more so than a character. Usually it'll be, imagine if this happened. That's how most of my stories have kind of come to me. Sometimes they're inspired by films that I might have seen or, songs that I might have heard. And other times I'll just be walking along and a random idea will pop into my head and I'll be like, that could make a movie. So a book even. I've still got my head stuck on movies. So yeah, I do. I don't actually write down an outline of the story at first. At first I'm just thinking about it. Like I say, I think about my stories for about a year before I come to write them. And it's only really when my publisher asks for a proper outline that I'll formulate that into words and make sure I've settled on, on the characters' names by that point. And then it's research. So at the moment I'm researching my next book, which is set in, mostly in the Yorkshire Dales, a little part of Australia. And it's about a character called Leah, whose parents were foster carers. So when she was growing up, she was sharing her home with troubled teenagers. And one of these teenagers is George. And they have a special bond. But then there's another friend of theirs called Theo, who is the son of a, sort of local landowner and, should on surface look like he's got it all, but doesn't very much. So he's still got his own issues. And the story's told between then when they're sort of 17, sort of teenagers, and now when they're in their 30s, and it's sort of alternating chapters, as you get a picture of it. So I'm still researching that, and I need to do a lot of research on the foster care system. So that's going to take me a while, because I just really I know it's going to be quite difficult doing that research. And I've already watched a few sort of documentaries about it with foster kids, and that's I had tears streaming down my face for half of it. So sometimes the research is fun and other times it's much more harrowing. And I think in this case, it's going to be a bit tricky. So Shannon asks, so Paige, when are you heading into Yorkshire for research? I'd happily show you some hidden gems and take you for a Yorkshire pudding lunch. That sounds amazing. And yeah, well, I'd love to be able to say I'm heading into research now, but with this whole lockdown scenario, it's not ideal. I was planning on going camping out there over May half term. That was the initial plan, but luckily, I'm already really familiar with the Yorkshire because my husband's Yorkshireman, and so I've been going up there for the last 24 years. His family still live up there, so we go up there often. So yeah, I'm very much looking forward to writing that one because I definitely sort of feel a little bit of a connection already with the Yorkshire Dales. And Melanie says, "Don't tell us about the new book, because I want to read it now." Yeah, you're going to have to wait, I'm afraid. I need to write it first. Have we got any more questions? Oh, last question. Okay. 45 minutes later after chatting. So Sue asks, who are your biggest literary influences and inspirations? I would say Marion Keyes is definitely like a big one for me. And, you know, her books were probably, and Helen Fielding, you know, Bridget Jones's Diary, like that was probably the first book I'd read in this genre and just laughed my head off. I still remember it was the first time I'd gone to Key West, where I later went back to research The Longest Holiday. And, you know, just remember sort of lying there in a sun lounger and just laughing my head off. And after that, you know, I read a lot of Marion Keyes, and when I read Watermelon, I loved this story about, you know, Claire and Adam, these characters, and then went on to read one of Marion's other books, and Claire and Adam were mentioned, and, you know, I realized that there was this whole series of Walsh sisters. You know, there were 5 sisters, and she carried on writing these books, and I loved that so much, and that was what gave me the initial idea. I was like, when I finished writing Lucy in the Sky, I desperately wanted to know what had happened to Lucy and Nathan, and so I incorporated a character into Lucy in the Sky, who then became the main character for Johnny Be Good. And I've done that ever since. You know, I've always sort of tried, if possible, to have a little link, just so you can kind of get a mini sort of update, you know. So Marion's definitely a big literary influence for me. So I think that might be my last question. Thank you so much to everybody for hanging out here, you know, and asking me all these questions. And there are so many that I still haven't answered. So I'm sorry about that, but I'm going to be doing plenty more of these live sessions. So I will keep you posted about them in lockdown. You know, I'm doing quite a few libraries in Australia over the next few weeks. So hopefully I'll get a chance to answer some more questions then. But for now, I just want to say thank you very much from Tessa and me. Like, she's just started to nibble on my finger, so this is probably a good time to take the puppy for a walk. And just tune in next week on Friday. I think it's in fact, it's not on Friday. I think it's the 7th of June. Please correct me if I'm wrong, Tim. But Michael Connolly is doing the next Facebook Live, so definitely, you know, with Chapter 1 Dymocks. So definitely tune in for that. You know, it'd be amazing. And they've already got, you can watch all of the ones from the last few weeks up on the Dymocks Books Facebook page. So definitely check those out. They're really, really good. So yeah, lots of love to you all, and thank you so much again. And really hope you're enjoying The Minute I Saw You, or do enjoy it. It's out in paperback in Australia already, but yeah, in the UK it's only an ebook until the 6th of August. But hope you enjoy it. Thanks again, everybody, and see you later. I'm off to drink this now, or I might even put it in the fridge and save it until there's an actual proper decent time to be drinking. Take care. Bye.